Chapter 10. Homeless. When I returned to the inn with heavy heart and red eyes, the landlord was standing in the yard. I was going to pass him to get to my dogs, but he stopped me. "Well, what about your master?" he asked. "He's sentenced." "How long?" 2 months prison." "How much fine?" 100 francs. 2 months, 100 francs, he repeated 2 or 3 times. I wanted to go on, but again he stopped me. "What are you going to do these 2 months?" "I don't know, sir." "Oh, you don't know. You've got some money to live on and to buy food for your animals, I suppose." "No, sir." "Then do you count on me keeping you?" "No, sir, I don't count on anyone." That was true. I did not count upon anyone. "Your master already owes me a lot of money," he continued. "I can't board you for 2 months without knowing if I shall be paid. You'll have to go." "Go? Where shall I go, sir?" "That's not my business. I'm nothing to you." "Why should I keep you?" For a moment I was dazed. The man was right. Why should he give me shelter? "Come, take your dogs and monkey and get out." "Of course, you must leave your master's bag with me. When he comes out of jail, he'll come here to get it, and then he can settle his account." An idea came to me. "As you know he will settle his bill then, can't you keep me until then, and add what I cost to it?" Ah. Your master might be able to pay for 2 days' lodging, but 2 months. That's a different thing. I'll eat as little as you wish." "And your dogs and monkey?" "No, be off. You'll pick up enough in the villages." "But, sir, how will my master find me when he comes out of prison?" "He'll come to look for me here. All you've got to do is to come back on that day." "And if he writes to me?" "I'll keep the letter." "But if I don't answer him?" "Oh, stop your talk. Hurry up and get out. I give you 5 minutes. If I find you here when I come out again I'll settle you." I knew it was useless to plead with him. I had to get out. I went to the stables to get the dogs and Pretty Heart, then strapping my harp on my shoulder I left the inn. I was in a hurry to get out of town, for my dogs were not muzzled. What should I say if I met a policeman? That I had no money? It was the truth, I had only 11 sous in my pocket. That was not enough to buy muzzles. They might arrest me. If Vitalis and I were both in prison, whatever would become of the animals? I felt the responsibility of my position. As I walked along quickly the dogs looked up at me in a way I could not fail to understand. They were hungry. Pretty Heart, whom I carried, pulled my ear from time to time to force me to look at him. Then he rubbed his stomach in a manner that was no less expressive than the looks the dogs cast at me. I also was hungry. We had had no breakfast. My 11 sous could not buy enough for dinner and supper, so we should have to be satisfied with 1 meal, which, if we took it in the middle of the day, would serve us for 2. I wandered along. I did not care where I went, it was all the same to me, for I did not know the country. The question of finding a place in which to sleep did not worry me, we could sleep in the open air. But to eat. We must have walked for about 2 hours before I dared to stop, and yet the dogs had looked up at me imploringly and Pretty Heart had pulled my ear and rubbed his stomach incessantly. At last I felt that I was far enough away from the town to have nothing to fear. I went into the first bakery that I came across. I asked for 1.5 pounds of bread. "You do well to take a 2-pound loaf," said the woman. "That's not too much for your menagerie. You must feed the poor dogs." Oh, no, it was not too much for my menagerie, but it was too much for my purse. The bread was 5 sous a pound, 2 pounds would cost 10 sous. I did not think it wise to be extravagant before knowing what I was going to do the next day. I told the woman in an offhand manner that 1.5 pounds was quite enough and politely asked her not to cut more. I left the shop with my bread clutched tightly in my arms. The dogs jumped joyfully around me. Pretty Heart pulled my hair and chuckled with glee. We did not go far. At the first tree that we saw I placed my harp against the trunk and sat down on the grass. The dogs sat opposite me, Capi in the middle, Dulcie at one side, Zerbino on the other. Pretty Heart, who was not tired, stood up on the watch, ready to snatch the first piece that he could. To eke out the meal was a delicate matter. I cut the bread into 5 parts, as near the same size as possible, and distributed the slices. I gave each a piece in turn, as though I were dealing cards. Pretty Heart, who required less food than we, fared better, for he was quite satisfied while we were still famished. I took 3 pieces from his share and hid them in my bag to give the dogs later. Then, as there still remained a little piece, I broke it and we each had some. That was for dessert. After the meal I felt that the moment had come for me to say a few words to my companions. Although I was their chief, I did not feel that I was too much above them not to wish them to take part in the grave situation in which we found ourselves. Capi had probably guessed my intentions, for he sat with his big, intelligent eyes fixed on me. "Yes, Capi," I said, "and you, Dulcie, Zerbino and Pretty Heart, my friends, I've bad news for you. We shan't see our master for 2 whole months." "Wah," barked Capi. "It's bad for him and it's also bad for us, for we depend on him for everything, and now he's gone, we haven't any money." At the mention of the word money, which he perfectly understood, Capi rose on his hind paws and commenced to trot round as though he were collecting money from the distinguished audience. "I see you want to give a performance, Capi," I continued. "That's good advice, but should we make anything? That's the question. We have only 3 sous left, so you mustn't get hungry. You've all to be very obedient, that will make it easier for us all. You must help me all you can, you dogs and Pretty Heart. I want to feel that I can count on you." I would not make so bold as to say that they understood all I said, but they got the general idea. They knew by our master's absence that something serious had happened, and they had expected an explanation from me. If they did not understand all that I said to them, they were at least satisfied that I had their welfare at heart, and they showed their satisfaction by the attention they gave me. Attention? Yes, on the part of the dogs only. It was impossible for Pretty Heart to keep still for long. He could not fix his mind upon one subject for more than a minute. During the first part of my discourse he had listened to me with the greatest interest, but before I had said 20 words, he had sprung up into a tree, the branches of which hung over our heads, and was now swinging himself from branch to branch. If Capi had insulted me in like manner, my pride would certainly have been hurt, but I was never astonished at anything Pretty Heart might do. He was so empty-headed. But after all, it was quite natural that he should want to have a little fun. I admit that I would like to have done the same. I would have gone up that tree with pleasure, but the importance and dignity of my present office did not permit me any such distractions. After we had rested a while I gave the sign to start. We had to find a place somewhere to lie down for the night and gain a few sous for our food for the next day. We walked for 1 hour, then came in sight of a village. I quickly dressed my troop, and in as good marching order as possible we made our entry. Unfortunately, we had no fife and we lacked Vitalis' fine, commanding presence. Like a drum major, he always attracted the eye. I had not the advantage of being tall, nor was I possessed of a wonderful head. Quite the reverse, I was small and thin and I must have worn a very anxious look. While marching I glanced to the right and to the left to see what effect we were producing. Very little, I regret to say. No one followed us. Upon reaching the small square upon which was a fountain shaded with trees, I took my harp and commenced to play a waltz. The music was gay, my fingers were light, but my heart was heavy. I told Zerbino and Dulcie to waltz together. They obeyed me at once and commenced to whirl round, keeping time. But no one put themselves out to come and see us, and yet in the doorways I saw several women knitting and talking. I continued to play, Zerbino and Dulcie went on with their waltz. Perhaps if one decided to come over to us, a second would come, then more and more. I played on and on, Zerbino and Dulcie went round and round, but the women in the doorways did not even look over at us. It was discouraging. But I was determined not to be discouraged. I played with all my might, making the chords of my harp vibrate, almost to breaking them. Suddenly a little child, taking its first steps, trotted from his home and came towards us. No doubt the mother would follow him, and after the mother a friend would come, and we should have an audience, and then a little money. I played more softly so as not to frighten the baby, and also to entice him to come nearer. With hands held out and swaying first on one foot, then on the other, he came on slowly. A few steps more and he would have reached us, but at that moment the mother looked round. She saw her baby at once. But instead of running after him as I had thought she would, she called to him, and the child obediently turned round and went back to her. Perhaps these people did not like dance music, it was quite possible. I told Zerbino and Dulcie to lie down, and I began to sing my canzonetta. Never did I try so hard to please. I had reached the end of the second line, when I saw a man in a round jacket, and I felt that he was coming towards me. At last, I tried to sing with even more fervor. "Hello, what are you doing here, young rogue?" he cried. I stopped, amazed at his words, and watched him coming near, with my mouth open. "What are you doing here, I say?" "Singing, sir." "Have you got permission to sing on a public square in our village?" "No, sir." "Well, be off, if you don't I'll have you arrested." "But, sir." "Be off, you little beggar." I knew from my poor master's example what it would cost me if I went against the town authorities. I did not make him repeat his order, I hurried off. Beggar. That was not fair. I had not begged, I had sung. In 5 minutes I had left behind me this inhospitable, but well-guarded, village. My dogs followed me with their heads lowered, and their tails between their legs. They certainly knew that some bad luck had befallen us. Capi, from time to time, went ahead of us and turned round to look at me questioningly with his intelligent eyes. Anyone else in his place would have questioned me, but Capi was too well-bred to be indiscreet. I saw his lip tremble in the effort he made to keep back his protest. When we were far enough away from the village, I signed to them to stop, and the 3 dogs made a circle round me, Capi in the middle, his eyes on mine. As we had no permission to play, they sent us away, I explained. "Well, then?" asked Capi, with a wag of his head. "So then we shall have to sleep in the open air and go without supper." At the word supper there was a general bark. I showed them my 3 sous. "You know that is all we have. If we spend those 3 sous tonight, we shall have nothing left for breakfast tomorrow. So, as we have had something today, it is better to save this." And I put my 3 sous back in my pocket. Capi and Dulcie bent their heads resignedly, but Zerbino, who was not so good, and who besides was a gourmand, continued to growl. I looked at him severely. "Capi, explain to Zerbino, he doesn't seem to understand," I said to faithful Capitano. Capi at once tapped Zerbino with his paw. It seemed as though an argument was taking place between the 2 dogs. One may find the word argument too much, when applied to dogs, but animals certainly have a peculiar language of their kind. As to dogs, they not only know how to speak, they know how to read. Look at them with their noses in the air or, with lowered head, sniffing at the ground, smelling the bushes and stones. Suddenly they'll stop before a clump of grass, or a wall, and remain on the alert for a moment. We see nothing on the wall, but the dog reads all sorts of curious things written in mysterious letters which we do not understand. What Capi said to Zerbino I did not hear, for if dogs can understand the language of men, men do not understand their language. I only saw that Zerbino refused to listen to reason, and that he insisted that the 3 sous should be spent immediately. Capi got angry, and it was only when he showed his teeth that Zerbino, who was a bit of a coward, lapsed into silence. The word silence is also used advisedly. I mean by silence that he laid down. The weather was beautiful, so that to sleep in the open air was not a serious matter. The only thing was to keep out of the way of the wolves, if there were any in this part of the country. We walked straight ahead on the white road until we found a place. We had reached a wood. Here and there were great blocks of granite. The place was very mournful and lonely, but there was no better, and I thought that we might find shelter from the damp night air amongst the granite. When I say we, I mean pretty hard and myself, for the dogs would not catch cold sleeping out of doors. I had to be careful of myself, for I knew how heavy was my responsibility. What would become of us all if I fell ill, and what would become of me if I had Pretty Heart to nurse? We found a sort of grotto between the stones, strewn with dried leaves. This was very nice. All that was lacking was something to eat. I tried not to think that we were hungry. Does not the proverb say, "He who sleeps, eats"? Before lying down I told Capi that I relied upon him to keep watch, and the faithful dog, instead of sleeping with us on the pine leaves, laid down like a sentinel at the entrance of our quarters. I could sleep in peace, for I knew that none would come near without me being warned by Capi. Yet, although, at rest on this point, I could not sleep at once. Pretty Heart was asleep beside me, wrapped up in my coat. Zerbino and Dulcie were stretched at my feet. But my anxiety was greater than my fatigue. This first day had been bad. What would the next day be? I was hungry and thirsty, and yet I only had 3 sous. How could I buy food for all if I did not earn something the next day? And the muzzles? And the permission to sing? Oh, what was to be done? Perhaps we should all die of hunger in the bushes. While turning over these questions in my mind, I looked up at the stars, which shone in the dark sky. There was not a breath of wind. Silence everywhere. Not the rustle of a leaf or the cry of a bird, nor the rumble of a cart on the road. As far as my eye could see, stretched space. How alone we were, how abandoned. The tears filled my eyes. Poor Mother Barberin. Poor Vitalis. I was lying on my stomach, crying into my hands, when suddenly I felt a breath pass through my hair. I turned over quickly, and a big soft tongue licked my wet cheek. It was Capi, who had heard me crying and had come to comfort me as he had done on the first day of my wanderings. With my 2 hands I took him by the neck and kissed him on his wet nose. He uttered 2 or 3 little mournful snorts, and it seemed to me that he was crying with me. I slept. When I awoke it was full day and Capi was sitting beside me, looking at me. The birds were singing in the trees. In the distance I could hear a church bell ringing the Angelus, the morning prayer. The sun was already high in the sky, throwing its bright rays down to comfort heart and body. We started off, going in the direction of the village where we should surely find a baker. When one goes to bed without dinner or supper one is hungry early in the morning. I made up my mind to spend the 3 sous, and after that we would see what would happen.